Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Senior Tech Club Live. This is episode number 15 that we have done since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis. I hope everybody is safe and well. It was a very sad and interesting weekend here in the Minneapolis area related to the murder of George Floyd. And so I hope everybody is safe and well. We're going to continue on our normal pace and continue on our discussion. You know, we are currently in a series that I call Better iPhone Photo Series. And in that particular series, we're really talking about getting past the point and click process that many people use with their iPhone photography. And that is coming to a better understanding of what your iPhone is capable of in regards to taking photos. All right, so today we're going to again start out with some inspiration, all right, in terms of iPhone photography. And then we are going to get into our topics of getting beyond the point and click. We want to talk about rule of thirds related to composition. We're going to talk about HDR photos. We're going to talk about live photos. And then we're going to start to get into video modes. We're going to talk about video mode and Pano mode. Now, just so you know what to expect, on Thursday of this week, same bat time, same bat channel, we are going to continue our discussion of iPhone modes and talk about slow motion. We're going to talk about time lapse. We're going to talk about portrait, and then we're going to talk about some of the advanced photography strategies that you get, particularly with iPhone 11, and that is night mode photos. Right. So there's a lot to cover today. All right, and so let's get started. If you recall, we have these housekeeping rules that we talk about every time we get together. This is all very informal. I just want you to pretend like we're sitting around the kitchen table. I cannot see you. I cannot hear you, but that doesn't mean that I don't want your questions. And so you have a couple of vehicles for questions. One is you can send me a question on the iPhone chat. When you see me looking over in this direction, that means I'm looking at my laptop computer where I have the iPhone chat displayed, or you can also send me a text message. This is not my regular iPhone text message, but rather through Google. And if you see me look here, that means I'm monitoring questions that might be coming there. Also, as a follow-up, if you have a follow-up question or comment about anything you hear today, you can send me a question at simplyquestions@seniortechclub.com, and I will get back to you. One of the statements that I made last Thursday as we started this iPhone discussion is that the iPhone puts a pretty darn good camera in your pocket. And last Thursday, we talked about some of the professional applications of iPhone photography. We talked about magazine covers, the Time magazine covers of a couple of years ago. We talked about some of the iPhone music videos, Lady Gaga as an example. And then we also talked about some of the recent broadcast applications of iPhone. Al Roker on the Today Show. We also talked about American Idol, right? Continuing on that discussion that the iPhone puts a pretty darn good camera in your pocket, I wanted to find a spot that could get you some inspiration. And I found a great site on the web, and it's called the iPhonePhotographyAwards.com site. So this is a collaborative effort where every year they invite iPhone photographers to send in their best photos, and there is a panel of judges who will then jury these photos and come up with some awards. And so for inspiration, one of the things I wanted to give you was the site where you can get to that. So it happens to be ippawards.com/gallery. Let's take a look at it. All right, so now you're looking at this on the screen. And the point here is that these are all photographs that have been taken by iPhone. And so, for instance, you can go into last year's photo. If I just click on the 2019 awards, we then have a display of the award winners. Now, I'm not going to take a look at these now, but this is all part of the validation that this is a pretty good camera. This can be a serious camera, and it is worthy of serious photography. So if you're looking for some inspiration, all right, in terms of this good camera and photos that it is capable of taking, I would encourage you to go to this ippawards.com/gallery. Remember, you can always download the slide deck afterwards. I will also put this resource on the Live 15 page that you came from a little bit earlier. All right, so here's the thing that we're trying to address in this series. I'm going to propose to you that the typical iPhone photographer, particularly an iPhone photographer which is in our community of older adults, it takes a two-step process to take a photo. They tap on the camera icon on the home screen, and then they point and they click by tapping on the shutter. Now that's all fine and good, but really our objective is to get beyond that point and click process and look to understand all of the capabilities, or many of the capabilities, of the iPhone so that we can put them to good use. All right, and so our focus here is on the camera app. All right, let's first of all talk about the rule of thirds and focus on how your iPhone can support your use of the rule of thirds with composition. All right, so now when we talk about rule of thirds, we're talking about photo composition and where you place the object of interest in your photograph. So take a look at the slide on the left-hand side. And as you see it alternate between the color image and the black and white image, you notice the grid that lines or divides the photo into 9 different sections. The essential rule of thirds proposes that when you have a featured item in your photograph, you don't want to put it smack dab in the middle. Right? What you want to do is you want to put it on the 1/3 line, either vertically or horizontally. All right, so here's the definition. Well, actually, before we get into the definition, I want to show you some other examples. I want to go back down to, I did a Google search, and I want to show you this. So I did a Google search, and that you can get to the same Google search by clicking on the link that's on this slide. But I want you to notice use of the rule of thirds, right? So here's an example of a little girl that's right on the 3rd line, all right? Right here is an example of a surfer who is sitting right on the 3rd line. And in fact, it is up, all right, on the intersection here is a good composition strategy. I'm going to show you one more. Actually, it's this one right here. Notice that the eye of this bumblebee is exactly at the rule of thirds intersection. All right. Well, so the point here is that the rule of thirds is a good strategy. And it turns out that your iPhone can put a grid on the screen, excuse me, let me go back and I can show you this. The iPhone can put a grid on the screen as a reminder and an aid for when you are taking your photographs, right? So if you notice on the screen, there's the 9 boxes of the rule of thirds is displayed with lines right on the screen. You can place these lines on your iPhone camera screen. They do not change the photograph. They certainly don't show up in the photo, but they're there just as a reminder. And it doesn't hurt to simply have them there so that when you hold up your camera to take a photo, that you are reminded on the screen about this particular composition strategy. So how do we do that? All right, so we let me change our arrangement here a little bit. All right, and so now as we typically do, sorry, I just have to rearrange here a little bit. All right, and so now as we typically do, let's demonstrate how we get to the settings. So as I show you on the slide deck, you're going to launch the settings app. And then you're going to scroll down the settings. You're going to scroll down settings until you see camera. And it's quite a ways down. All right. And when you find camera, you click on camera. And now when you see at the top of the screen grid means green means on. All right. When you do these setting switches. And so in this particular case, you can turn this on, and the end result is that when you close settings and you go into the camera app, all right, I'm going to kind of close it here. Now you notice that you actually get the grid on the screen. Now I'm going to change this back to a photo because I was doing some work in there. All right, and so you notice the grid is on the screen. Now I've darkened the screen so that you can see the grid, but then that grid is going to help you improve the composition of your photos with a commonly used strategy, and that strategy is simply the rule of thirds. So give that a try. It can help the quality of your photos to take that focal point of the photo and move it off so it is not directly in the center of the photo, but rather is on one of the lines. Second topic that we want to talk about today is the use of HDR photos. All right, let me go back to a little bigger screen for our definition. All right, HDR stands for high dynamic range, and it is essentially a strategy that the iPhone offers. And by the way, this has come on other cameras, all right, other digital cameras or film cameras too. But this is an iPhone strategy where the iPhone will take multiple photos, literally within milliseconds of each other, and then use those multiple photos to balance the shadows and the highlights and the lighting. So it is an excellent strategy, a very well-regarded strategy to provide the best lighting when there happens to be a lot of lighting contrast in what you're trying to photograph. All right, so as an example, you are doing an outdoor photo and there are trees right in the vicinity, and now you're shooting the photo. The subject that you have might be under the tree, so there's some shade there, but then there's some blue sky, much brighter elements of the photo. HDR will even things out by automatically combining the photos for the best image. It is a good strategy. All right, so now how do you do this? How do you take advantage of HDR? Well, it depends. All right. If you happen to have an iPhone which is a little bit older, HDR, if you notice on the screenshot right here, HDR is an option. that you can control right on the camera screen. And then when you tap on HDR, you are given three options, right? You can choose auto, which would be the recommended setting, or you can choose on and off, right? But this is really good stuff. And so auto is really the recommended setting. And in fact, this is so good, all right? HDR is so good that now in our current phones, everything since about the iPhone 8, right? HDR is actually on by default, all right? And now there is no longer a switch in the camera app. Right? And what you're going to do instead is you're going to turn it off or on in settings. And so you've noticed this on the screen. In fact, let me pull this up, right? And so if once again you go into settings and you go into cameras, you tap on cameras and you scroll down, and one of the settings down toward the bottom of the screen is either going to read auto HDR, that's like an iPhone 7 and 8, or it's going to read Smart HDR, which comes with iPhones 10 and 11. So whichever you happen to have, just turn it on. That would be the recommended setting so that your iPhone is then in auto HDR mode all the time. And so when the iPhone senses a high contrast opportunity, it'll simply use that strategy in order to take better photos. Now, if you are interested in more detail, there are some additional details that I would encourage you to go online to the one of the photography pages on the Senior Tech Club website in order to read more. Right. The next topic that we wanted to explore was the topic of live photos. Right. So you might see live photos if you go into the camera app, and once again, I'm going to cover up, and up on the upper right-hand corner of your app screen, I know that in earlier versions of the camera app, it was sitting right in the middle, but there is a live photo setting, circles with a little target area that you can tap to turn this on and off. All right, so the question is, what is a live photo? Well, a live photo is literally a photograph, but your camera app will add a second and a half of video before and then after the picture is taken. And so whatever action happens to be occurring when you take that photograph, your iPhone is going to capture a second and a half after and a second and a half before the photo is actually taken. All right, so now you're asking, well, when are you going to use this? Well, it creates an interesting photo whenever you have a little bit of action that just gives that photo some context, right? Now, before we leave the screen, it's the live photos is available on iPhone 6s and later. It's typically on by default. And one way to turn it on and off is to simply tap on the live photo setting, which is directly in the camera app. All right, so now you get this live photo. And so the question becomes, how do you turn it on and off? All right. Well, let me give you a little bit of a demonstration. Now, this is going to be a little different. I am going to go to here, and if I go to my Photos app, right, I can scroll all the way down my albums list, right? So I'm under albums, right? And by the way, hopefully we'll get a chance at some point in the future here to spend some time in the Photos app itself. But I can tap on live photos right now. If this happens to be my grandson down here, right? And so if I tap on this live photo to display it, now I changed the orientation. Now you didn't see anything live here, but if I take this screen, let me move this out of the way. If I take the screen and press and hold it, there you actually see the live video, right? So you actually see that's me, right, helping him on his little tricycle, and there's a little tricycle movement, all right? Here's another live photo, right? So this is a photograph that I took of a Ferris wheel, and we get flashing lights. Now, I have done something different with this one. Now, remember, to play a live photo, your typical strategy is to press and hold, all right, is to press and hold. But I want to go back to here. In that, I am going to exit this and go back to my slide deck. In that, in your Photos app, there are some special effects that you can associate with a live photo, right? Now, we're not going to take too much time to explore these today, but I do want you to be aware of them. So if you are displaying a live photo like this one, it's hard for me to demonstrate this because I have difficulty displaying this. But if you swipe up on a live photo, you can choose between loop and bounce or just live, which is the normal live performance. So I just put it onto bounce. And this is, as you see in my definition, is where the little video loop is going backwards and forwards and in a continuous loop process. It's a pretty cool little effect. All right, and so here's what you get then. So the way you do these special effects with live photos is you display the live photo right in the Photos app, and then you swipe up on that live photo. And by doing so, you'll be given the option of a loop, which is just like a repeating loop, or you can do a bounce, which is repeating forward and backward, or you can do a long, which is really turning that live photo into a long exposure photo, something that you might do in order to capture fireworks as an example. So the point that I want to make, the key point is I wanted you to be aware of the definition of a live photo, how it takes about a second and a half of video at the beginning and at the end of your photograph. And then we'll also give you these special effects that you can creatively use. So consider using that. You'll have to explore just a little bit, but turn on live photos, take a couple of photos. Hopefully have some action. Right? I think they're better when there's a little action. It's not so great if it's just a still life or just a basic landscape. But then play around with some of these effects, and you get these special effects by swiping up on a live photo in order to choose these options. Another thing I wanted to talk about is related to live photos is that, live photos is on by default. Right? So if you're like me, right, you can find some applications of live photos. There are some times where I think of it and say I'd like to use it, but the majority of the times when I'm taking a photo, I would like it to be off. Well, but there is no way to permanently turn live photos off, but there is a very useful setting that will save your preferred photo settings so that the live photo doesn't come on automatically every time you use it. All right, so here are the steps to do this. All right, and so in order to get to this preserve setting options, you're going to go into the camera app first. And then inside the camera app, now you're looking at my computer screen, you're going to turn live photos on or off by just tapping on the setting, right? So in our particular case, we're going to turn it off because that's the preferred setting that we want to maintain. Then we're going to go back to the home screen, and now we're going to go into step number 3, which is go into the settings app. We're going to scroll all the way down until we see the camera setting. And then there is a setting toward the top, which is called Preserve Settings. And what you would like to do is to turn on the live photo so that it remembers your desire to have live photos turned off from session to session, right? It's a great little trick for just making sure that you don't take live photos when you really didn't intend to take live photos, right? So once again, you can download this slide deck if you want to come back to this step-by-step process for doing this at some point in the future. I'll make sure that this slide deck is here by this afternoon. Okay. Now, in our final 2 topics of today, we are going to start to talk about modes. And when we are talking about modes in our iPhone camera app, we're talking about that row of settings that you see right above your shutter button, which is the row that allows you to select video versus photo versus square versus Pano. The 2 that we're going to explore today is video and then Pano. All right, and so now when you launch your camera app, sorry, I did a little shifting here again. When you launch your camera app, your modes show up down at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to darken this as I've been doing. All right. All right, and so now, oops, hang on. There we go. All right, and so now you can tap portrait, you can tap Pano, you can slide these settings in order to send them back and forth. Almost all the time that we have been talking about the camera app, we have been talking about it in the context of photo. But let's talk about video. All right, something I want you to notice is that when you go into video mode, notice how your shutter button changes. So if I go back to photo, now the shutter button is its conventional white color. But when you go into video, it turns red. Now, that's a useful tip. In the event that you take videos and now the next time you launch the camera app, it remembers your previous setting. Sometimes it's easy to accidentally start taking a video when you had intended to take a photo. So knowing that the shutter is red is a good indicator that you are taking a video at this point. Now, I want you to notice if we start the video camera, notice that you have a timer on the screen up at the top. And notice how your shutter button has changed again. So now it's sitting there as a square. So this is your indication that you are currently recording video. I also want you to notice that you now have a white shutter button next to it, and you would do that white shutter if you want to take a still photograph while you are recording the video. So if there's something particularly interesting that you would like to capture, you can tap on that white shutter button in order to take essentially a freeze frame within the video. And then finally, you can tap the red shutter button in order to stop the recording of the video. Another thing on the video, it does allow you to do zoom, all right, just like you do zoom. And now those of you who attended our session last week, remember we talked about it's better to zoom with your feet or to use the digital zoom. You notice I have tapped on the one time and the wide angle on this iPhone 11, right? So it's better to either zoom with your feet by getting closer to your subject or to use the digital. If you are zooming like this, you do lose resolution. That may not always give you the quality of video that you're looking for. Now, there will be times where you're doing a video and you have to do the pinch and zoom, all right? We're pinching and zoom like this. This is the topic that we talked about last week. All right. Our final video mode is Pano, all right? And let me go back to this screen. And Pano is a great mode for taking panoramic photos. All right, so what you see on the screenshot happens to be from the Smoky Mountains. And so with a panoramic photo, you can take a photo which is much wider than the normal frame of your phone. Right, here's another example of a panoramic photo from Boston Harbor when my wife and I were in Boston here a year and a half ago. And so in all cases like this, it's a great tool for taking landscape or photos that do not fit on the conventional frame. Right. So how do you do a Pano? It's a three-step process. Right? Where step number one is you put your phone into Pano mode along the mode line. Number two, you then tap the shutter. And then number three, after tapping the shutter, you are going to get a message on the screen that says move iPhone continuously while taking a panorama. And so after pressing the shutter, you are going to be doing something like this. You're going to be holding your phone out, and then you're going to be moving it in the direction of the arrow as you take the photo. When you're done, you press the shutter again. All right, so just repeating that process, you put it into Pano mode, you hold up your phone so that you're able to move it along a horizontal line, you tap the shutter, and then you are in effect stitching together a wide photo by moving your camera. And when you have captured the entire image that you want to capture, you tap the shutter again. And you will then end up with this type of photo. Right? You can almost picture me sitting in the back of a tour boat in Boston Harbor, holding my camera going across in order to capture the entire harbor cityscape of Boston. All right? That's a Pano photo. Works fabulously when you are out taking landscapes or cityscapes where you want to grab an image which is wider than what you can normally fit onto the frame of your iPhone. Okay. All right, so here's what we covered today. All right, we spent some time talking about the rule of thirds, right? And that's a composition strategy. So composition is how do you set up your photos? How do you stage your photos? And the rule of thirds indicates that you really don't want to have your subject of interest smack dab in the middle of your photo. You want to get it off on the 1/3 edge. And what we talked about was that with your iPhone camera, there are a set of grids that you can put onto the screen that will act as a reminder and an aid for you to improve your composition. Secondly, we talked about HDR, high dynamic range. And this is a strategy where the iPhone takes multiple pictures in order to give you a better balance of lighting and shadows. It's a good strategy. Older iPhones, you had to turn it on manually. Newer iPhones, it's on manually by default. And you just need to be aware of it. Next, we talked about live photos, where a live photo is defined as taking a second and a half of video and attaching it to the front and the back of a regular photograph. And then with that, you can either display it with the motion to give it some motion context, or you can do a looping process in order to get creative with this photograph. We talked about video mode. We talked about how the shutter changes. We also talked about being able to do zoom within video. And then we talked about the Pano mode. And the Pano mode is great for doing landscape photos where the image doesn't fit onto the camera frame, but you can take your photo by launching it in Pano mode and moving it across your subject. Right? All great tools, and we wanted to take this time today in live number 15 to give you a definition and some applications for some of these tools. All right, so now what's next in live 16? Well, live 16 is going to come on Thursday, and with live 16, we are going to get into part 3 of our Better iPhone Photography series. And in number 16, we are going to continue our discussion of modes. We're going to talk about doing slow motion video, right? If you have a grandchild that you are going to capture in a soccer game or a basketball game, might be an effective place to use slow-mo. We are going to talk about time-lapse mode, where if you need to capture something over a series of, let's say an hour, a couple of hours, and we'll play some demonstrations so that you can picture this. We're going to talk about portrait mode, and so later iPhones have given us the ability to do a portrait mode. And the basic strategy of the portrait mode is to give you that fuzzy background while you are doing a portrait photo. And we're also going to talk about and focus on night mode. Now, night mode is something that is new to the iPhone 11 series. So if you have an iPhone 11, we'll talk about how you can use night mode in order to improve your evening photos. Once again, if you want more information about upcoming sessions, or if you want to see information, or if you want to see the recordings of the archive of our previous sessions, you can go to the link which is showing on the bottom of the screen in your browser. You can type links.seniortechclub.com/live, and you'll get the whole catalog of live videos. So once again, please stay well, please stay safe during this time. Don't forget to wash your hands and keep on learning. And we hope to see you back here on Thursday to continue with part 3 of our Better iPhone Photography series. Thanks for attending.